The captain's voice came over the speakers, and every conversation stopped. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a medical emergency. A long pause. If there is a certified combat pilot on board, I need you in the cockpit immediately. The cabin fell silent. People looked around, waiting for someone to stand. Nobody did. Then a flight attendant rushed to seat 8A and gently woke a young woman who had slept through the entire flight. She opened her eyes, glanced out the window once, and calmly asked, "Which system failed?" The captain's stunned reply changed everything. "How did you know something failed?" By the time boarding began, Gate 27 had dissolved into the familiar chaos of rolling suitcases, impatient sighs, and the soft chime announcing another full flight. Business travelers hurried toward first class without looking up. Families counted backpacks for the third time. A young couple argued over whose turn it was to carry the diaper bag. Nobody noticed the woman standing quietly near the end of the boarding line. She wasn't dressed like someone important. No designer luggage. No expensive headphones. Just faded jeans, a charcoal gray t-shirt, worn hiking boots, and a small olive green backpack that looked older than it should have. She checked her boarding pass once. Seat 8A. Then she stepped onto the aircraft without saying a word. Inside the cabin, passengers settled into their routines. Some immediately reached for their phones before airplane mode interrupted reality. Others fought for overhead bin space, as if it were a championship sport. The woman in 8A simply placed her backpack beneath the seat in front of her, fastened her seatbelt, leaned her head against the window, and closed her eyes before boarding had even finished. The businessman across the aisle glanced over. "Must have pulled an all-nighter," he muttered. His wife shrugged. "Or she's terrified of flying." Neither of them realized she had heard every word. She simply didn't care. Rows behind her sat 12-year-old Ethan beside his mother. He kept peeking toward seat 8A. "Mom," he whispered, "how can someone fall asleep before the plane even takes off?" His mother smiled. "Some people travel a lot." Ethan wasn't convinced. "She looks like she's been awake for a week." Meanwhile, a flight attendant walked down the aisle completing final safety checks. She smiled at every passenger. But when she reached row 8, she paused for half a second. The woman in 8A never stirred. Her breathing was slow, steady, almost unbelievably calm. The attendant continued forward without another thought. 40 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft leveled above a sea of brilliant white clouds. The cabin lights dimmed. Conversations faded. Coffee cups appeared. Laptop screens glowed. Seat 8A never moved. The woman remained asleep despite the gentle vibration of the engines. Outside the window, towering cloud formations stretched toward the horizon. It looked peaceful, almost perfect. Then the airplane gave a sudden jolt. Several passengers grabbed their armrests. A baby started crying. The captain's voice came over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered an area of unstable air. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The announcement sounded calm, professional. Still, something about the captain's tone felt different. Not frightened, focused. The turbulence continued. Not violent, just enough to make conversation stop. The businessman folded his laptop. Ethan looked nervously out the window. Even the flight attendants, trained to remain composed, exchanged quick glances as they secured the beverage carts earlier than expected. One attendant quietly picked up the intercom phone. Another disappeared behind the forward galley curtain. The passengers noticed. Nobody said anything, but everyone felt it. Something wasn't quite normal. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The turbulence eased. Relief slowly returned. People laughed nervously. Someone joked about never flying again. A few passengers even unbuckled their seatbelts. Then every speaker inside the aircraft clicked. Silence swept through the cabin. The captain spoke again.
His voice was slower now.
Measured. "Ladies and gentlemen." A pause followed. "If there are any certified combat pilots on board this aircraft." Another pause. "Would you please identify yourselves immediately?" For 2 full seconds, nobody moved. Passengers looked at one another with wide eyes. A businessman raised an eyebrow. A retired teacher whispered, Did he really say combat pilots? Across the aisle, Ethan stared toward the front of the cabin. So, is someone going to stand up? Nobody did, except one flight attendant. Her eyes settled on seat 8A. The sleeping woman's backpack had shifted slightly beneath the seat. A thin silver chain was visible near the zipper. Attached to it, military dog tags. The attendant blinked. She looked once toward the cockpit, then back at the woman. Carefully, she stepped closer. "Ma'am." No response. She gently touched the woman's shoulder. "Excuse me, ma'am." The woman's eyes opened instantly. Not with confusion. Not with panic. With complete awareness. The flight attendant leaned closer and spoke softly. "The captain is asking if there are any combat pilots on board." For the first time since boarding, the woman spoke. Just 4 calm words. "What's the aircraft doing?" The attendant froze. Those weren't the words of a frightened passenger. They were the words of someone who already understood that something serious was happening. Without another word, the woman reached down, unzipped her worn backpack, and quietly pulled out a weathered leather credential holder. The gold military insignia on the front caught the cabin light. The flight attendant's expression changed instantly. Asterisk, asterisk. The flight attendant stared at the worn leather credential holder as the woman flipped it open. Inside was an official military identification card. Beneath her photograph were words that immediately explained why her voice had been so calm. Former U.S. Air Force combat pilot. The attendant's eyes widened. "Ma'am." The woman closed the holder. "Take me to the captain." There wasn't a trace of panic in her voice. No dramatic questions. No hesitation. Just quiet confidence. The flight attendant nodded and quickly led her toward the front of the aircraft. Every passenger in the first few rows watched in silence. The businessman who had assumed she was simply exhausted leaned into the aisle. "Wait, she's actually a pilot?" No one answered. As the cockpit door opened briefly, the captain looked up. For a split second, relief crossed his face. "You flew fighters?" he asked. She gave a small nod. "For 12 years. The first officer looked at her with cautious hope. "We're dealing with an equipment issue that's increased our workload. The aircraft remains controllable, but we'd value another experienced set of eyes as we work through the checklists." She listened without interrupting. Her years of training had taught her something most people never learned. The first person to speak the most isn't always the one helping the most. The first person to stay calm usually is. She looked over the cockpit displays from behind the crew, careful not to interfere. "You're following the correct procedure," she said. The captain exhaled slowly. "That's reassuring to hear." She pointed toward one of the reference manuals. "Let's verify every step before making the next decision." The captain nodded. Exactly what he had planned to do. Having another experienced aviator calmly confirm the process gave everyone in the cockpit greater confidence. Back in the cabin, passengers noticed something unusual. The flight attendants no longer looked frightened. They looked focused, purposeful. One attendant smiled reassuringly as she walked down the aisle checking seatbelts once more. "We're doing well," she said gently. "Please remain seated." The simple sentence eased dozens of worried minds. Even little Ethan noticed the change. He tugged on his mother's sleeve. "The lady from 8A. She's helping them, isn't she?" His mother looked toward the front of the aircraft. "I think she is." Minutes passed. Every second felt longer than the last. The engines continued their steady rhythm. The airplane remained stable. The captain and first officer carefully reviewed each checklist while maintaining constant communication with air traffic control. The woman from seat 8A never tried to take control. She understood something important. This was their cockpit, their responsibility. She was there to support, not replace them. Professionalism meant respecting every person's role. Occasionally, the captain asked for her opinion. Each time her answers were short.
Clear.
Practical. No need to rush. Confirm the indication. Stay with the checklist. Her calm voice became another steady instrument inside the flight deck. Meanwhile, rumors spread quietly through the cabin. "I heard she's military. My cousin said she flew fighter jets." "Is she still active duty?" Nobody knew. The The businessman who had judged her earlier lowered his eyes. I shouldn't have assumed anything. Across the aisle, another passenger smiled. Funny how the quietest person on the plane turned out to be the most experienced. The flight attendants continued offering water to nervous passengers. Children began relaxing. Conversations slowly returned. Not because the uncertainty had disappeared, but because confidence had replaced fear. Everyone could feel it. The crew wasn't reacting. They were working. Methodically. Professionally. As a team. The woman from 8A glanced through the cockpit window toward the endless clouds. They reminded her of another flight years ago. Another crew. Another difficult day. Her instructor had told her something she never forgot. Experience isn't about never facing problems. It's about refusing to let problems make your decisions for you. She smiled faintly. Those words had stayed with her ever since. The captain finished another checklist and contacted air traffic control. Within moments, new information came through his headset. He listened carefully before looking toward the first officer, then toward the woman. We've been cleared to divert. She nodded. That's the safest choice. The first officer began preparing for the approach. Every movement inside the cockpit remained calm and deliberate. No raised voices. No rushed decisions. Only discipline, training, and teamwork. In the cabin, the fasten seatbelt sign illuminated once again. The familiar chime echoed overhead. Passengers instinctively looked toward the front. The captain's voice returned. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Our crew is preparing for an unscheduled landing as a precaution. Everything is being handled according to established procedures. Please remain seated with your seatbelts securely fastened. The announcement was calm, professional, yet every passenger understood the seriousness of the moment. Silence settled across the aircraft. The woman from seat 8A looked out the cockpit window as the runway slowly appeared in the distance. The captain adjusted his grip on the controls. Then, without taking his eyes off the approach, he spoke quietly. We'll have one opportunity to do this exactly right. The woman gave a confident nod. So, let's make it count. The runway grew larger with every passing second. Inside the cockpit, no one spoke unless it mattered. Every checklist had been completed. Every procedure had been verified. Now came the part that demanded complete concentration. The captain kept both hands steady on the controls. The first officer monitored every instrument. The woman from seat 8A stood quietly behind them, saying nothing. There was nothing left to add. The crew knew exactly what to do. She trusted them. That trust meant everything. Back in the cabin, the atmosphere had completely changed. No one was looking at phones anymore. The businessman closed his laptop for good. A little girl reached for her father's hand. Ethan stared out the window, watching the airport slowly come into view. Even the flight attendants had taken their jump seats. One of them smiled reassuringly before making the final announcement. Cabin crew, prepare for landing. The words echoed through the aircraft. Passengers tightened their seatbelts one last time. The engines changed pitch as the airplane descended. Every heartbeat seemed louder than before. Yet something remarkable had happened. The panic was gone. In its place was quiet confidence. Not because the situation had become easy, but because everyone had witnessed professionalism under pressure. The wheels approached the runway. The captain focused straight ahead. Speed stabilized. The first officer confirmed. Landing checklist complete. A gentle silence filled the cockpit. Then, a soft bump. Another. The landing gear met the runway. The aircraft rolled forward smoothly. The engines gradually slowed. No sudden movements. No dramatic swerves. Just a controlled landing performed exactly as trained. For several seconds, nobody inside the cabin reacted, almost as if they couldn't believe it was over. Then applause erupted, louder than the engines had ever been. Passengers clapped. Some laughed with relief. Others wiped tears from their eyes. A few simply closed their eyes and whispered quiet words of gratitude. The captain picked up the intercom one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank each of you for remaining calm and following every instruction from our crew.
He paused.
There is one person I'd especially like to recognize today. Every passenger looked toward the front. The passenger seated in 8A provided professional support and valuable experience during an unexpected situation. She reminded all of us that training, teamwork, and calm decision-making make an extraordinary difference. The entire cabin turned toward the woman. She looked slightly embarrassed. She hadn't expected any attention. She simply nodded politely. The applause grew even louder. As the aircraft reached the gate, emergency personnel completed routine inspections while the doors remained closed for a few minutes. Eventually, the captain stepped into the cabin. For the first time, many passengers saw him face to face. He walked directly to seat 8A. Without hesitation, he extended his hand. "Thank you." She shook it. "You and your crew did the hard work." The captain smiled. "Maybe. But your calm reminded us to trust our training." The first officer nodded in agreement. "It helped more than you know." Passengers slowly gathered their belongings. The businessman who had judged her first stepped into the aisle. "I'm sorry," he admitted. "I thought you were just another tired traveler." She smiled kindly. "We're all just travelers. Sometimes people carry stories no one else can see." He nodded, quietly humbled. Little Ethan walked over with his mother. He looked up at her with wide eyes. "Were you really a combat pilot?" She smiled. "I was." "Were you scared?" She thought about the question for a moment. "Of course." He looked surprised. "But brave people aren't the ones who never feel afraid. They're the ones who stay calm long enough to help." Ethan grinned. "I want to be like that someday." "I think you can." Outside the aircraft, local reporters waited near the terminal after hearing about the precautionary landing. Cameras pointed toward the exit. Most expected the captain to be the first interview. Instead, he gestured toward the woman from seat 8A. She quietly shook her head. No interviews. She adjusted the strap of her old backpack, the same backpack everyone had ignored while boarding. She thanked the crew one final time. Then she walked through the terminal without looking back. No celebration, no speech, no request for recognition. Just another passenger disappearing into the crowd. Later that evening, many people from Flight 728 would tell friends about the quiet woman in seat 8A. Some remembered her calm voice. Others remembered her gentle smile. But every single one remembered the same lesson. Real heroes rarely announce who they are. They simply stand up when someone needs them most. And when the journey is over, they quietly take their seat among everyone else. The end.